Speed enforcement cameras and school safety issues continue to generate heated and lengthy debates at Barrie City Hall. During the May 29 General Committee meeting at Barrie City Hall, councillors once again discussed safety issues concerning school zones. Ward 7 councillor and former law enforcement officer Gary Harvey expressed concerns about the speed camera pilot program. He highlighted the current system's lack of capacity to handle additional cameras and emphasized the need for adequate staff and facilities before expanding the pilot program.
But where I struggle with this is where we're only about 4 or 5 months into a pilot, and we've already received information in a previous staff report that the provincial offences officers that are monitoring the cameras are not able to keep up with the current flow. And then the fact that we just recently passed the alternative penalty system where then screeners will be in place, which will expedite the process in processing tickets, but that's not going to happen until at least the end of this year. So I'm just really struggling to see why we would be putting more pressure on the system when it seems to me that the system can't keep up with the current flow.
Mayor Alex Nuttall, however, continued his support for the program, which is generating hundreds of thousands of dollars for the city. He also emphasized the reinvestment of ticket revenues into safety measures. The city is planning another program to ensure school safety. It is considering to spend between $350,000 to $400,000 on an adult school crossing guard program. The report by staff identified 9 locations across the city. However, due to the high proposed costs and lack of clarity on the selection of these locations, the proposal was sent back to the Community Safety Committee. Please use the timestamps in the description to jump to the relevant part of the General Committee meeting video.
The lease of additional speed camera. Councillor Harvey, the floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Nuttall. I'll put it on the floor as printed. Start off with a couple of questions to staff, if I could, please. And it's a bit of a regurgitation of when this went to committee. So through you to staff, this has always been mentioned to us as a pilot project, and typically what's the length of a pilot project?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Harvey. So typically pilot projects do last around a year or so. But in this case, because the intention really was to move the cameras every couple months to get through basically all 10 zones, or all 10 wards rather, we'll be looking at most likely it's going to be about a 2-year total pilot project to be able to do that full rotation of all 10 wards.
Great. And just one other question as a follow-up. A few weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, we passed some capital funding and 2 new positions, and some of that capital is involving building some offices, I understand, at the Provincial Offences Court over on Cedar Point for the future junior prosecutor and screeners. What is the anticipated completion date of that capital project?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Harvey, we still have to, now that Council's approved the funds to do that, we have to work with corporate facilities on some timelines. We're hoping for fall to winter of this year.
Okay, thank you. So this is where I struggle to support this. I'm fully supportive of the camera system. I've seen it work in other municipalities. Obviously, as someone that used to be in law enforcement myself, we had it in our municipality for the last 3 years. It works. There's no 2 buts about that. But where I struggle with this is where we're only about 4 or 5 months into a pilot, and we've already received information in a previous staff report that the provincial offences officers that are monitoring the cameras are not able to keep up with the current flow, and that they've been concentrating on only the school time hours when it comes to enforcing and issuing the offence notices. And then the fact that we just recently passed the alternative penalty system where then screeners will be in place, which will expedite the process in processing tickets, but that's not going to happen until at least the end of this year. So I'm just struggling to see where this is actually going to flow appropriately with having the appropriate staff in place, having their offices in place so that way these screeners can do their jobs, and basically doubling the amount of tickets that our current provincial offences officers can't keep up with. So I'm just really struggling to see why we would be putting more pressure on the system when it seems to me that the system can't keep up with the current flow. The other issue that I have is when it comes to the signage, and depending on how this goes, I may do a further amendment, but right now what we've been seeing as the signs are getting moved around is they're not being signed the same way. Our locations are only set up so that way we only have one sign that says that it's 50 kilometers an hour, or 40 kilometers an hour, I should say, during 7 to 5, Monday to Friday. Whereas if you go into many other municipalities that are using the camera locations, they actually have two. Same thing with the camera, the little square sign with the camera being used, they're putting two out. Whereas even here, what I've been seeing is each of the two locations are being signed differently. One location, the camera sign is as you're entering the area, and the other location is literally physically attached to the pole where the camera is situated. Now that does, believe it or not, actually meet provincial legislation because it just says that you have to have the sign at or near where the camera is situated. But I've never seen any other municipality put the signs up like that, even though it is permitted. I would just like to see, I don't want this program to be the, aha, we caught ya, or looked at as being a cash grab, because we know it's not a cash grab, because if you look at the numbers that are released by Guelph, they're actually only seeing about 15% of the revenue that the whole system is bringing in. So it just shows that the cost to run the program is extremely expensive. However, it does slow people down. So I'm happy that it doesn't look like a cash grab, because if all of a sudden 50% of the funds were coming into the city, then it would be a different conversation. But I just don't know why we're, in my opinion, taking the cart before the horse and adding more cameras until we've got all the pieces in place for this alternative penalty system to be up and running. And then that would be the appropriate time, in my opinion, to add more cameras. Because the other thing too, if you look around like York Region, who's had the camera system for almost 4 years, they've got 3 cameras for the entire region. Now they were just on regional roads because of the way their government's set up there. And it's only just now that towns like Newmarket and stuff have expressed interest in having cameras on their town roads. But I just think we're pushing this along too quick. I think there's many bugs behind the scenes that need to be fixed out before we consider adding more cameras, and I think this is just putting a little bit too much strain on a system that I don't think can keep up as it is by what I've seen and what that previous staff memo definitely indicated. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Councillor. Madam Clerk, on the timing, is there any further comment you have?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to members of council, now that we have the approval to start working on the administrative monetary program, we are bringing the bylaws forward to get the ball rolling before summer recess. We anticipate with all the MTO approval timelines and things that we have to meet for that, we are hoping to get that up and running by fall of this year, so September, October is what we're targeting. And that, again, depends on our work with the MTO. With respect to the number of tickets being processed, we are bringing on 2 more officers. They should be starting within the next couple weeks. The Ontario Traffic Council are doing training sessions based on municipal need now, so they should be able to be trained. These new provincial offences officers should be able to be trained by the end of June and be brought on board to start processing tickets. And the screening officers we wouldn't retain until we had the monetary program in place and had some approval, had some I guess, timelines in place for it to be implemented.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions from members of council? Not seeing any. My comments would be, first of all, I don't believe that the rate of tickets is going to be maintained as it was in the first few months. I would guess that it's actually come down between then and now. I don't know for sure, but that would be a guess. Based on the fact that we put them in the highest volume, highest speed areas first. So the data would suggest that you're going to see a reduction over time, which is one of the reasons that I didn't want to just proceed with the number of hirings before that we were talking about. I totally understand cart before horse, Councillor, and I think that that's good. You know, it's always good to step back, take a second look, make sure that we are making the right decision. It sounds like there's an alignment between when we'd actually be able to get this going in terms of the fall and when the additional officers and space is going to be ready for them. So for me, I feel comfortable at this point, but I think we, especially on high revenue items, we all need to do gut checks to make sure that we're doing this for the right reason. And finally, to those who've had tickets, more specifically those who've had repeated tickets, you know, I think that we've been very prudent with how we're approaching this, in the sense that your ticket is a donation towards a traffic calming measure somewhere in the city, whether that's a camera, or the individuals who work on the cameras, or physical infrastructure, or perhaps others going forward. So I think that there's not a, hey, let's increase the number of tickets so that we can, you know, have lunch on Friday. This is increase the safety and reduce the speeds, and those that don't, we're going to reinvest in safety on our streets around the city. And as long as that's the philosophy we're acting with, I think we'll be in good shape as a city council. With that, I'll call the vote. All those in, I'm just questioning myself, you didn't put an amendment on the floor, did you? No. So all those in favor of the motion as written, it carries.
Separate report, please.
Separate report is requested, Madam Clerk. Could you confirm, please?
Yes, separate report.
Separate report, thank you. And we're now going to go on to DEV 021-24. That's the Adult School Crossing Guard Program. Councillor Courser.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Nuttall, and I'd like to just ask a couple of simple questions to staff regarding the report. On page 3, paragraph 11. Oh, sorry, I have to put the motion on the floor as printed. Skipped right over that, didn't I? Okay. Now, if I may, through you, Mayor Nuttall, to staff, I'm sure I'm asking Ms. Banfield, for the adult crossing guards for paragraph 3, page 3, paragraph 11, January 20th, the numbers were significantly lower with relation to incidents that were happening in at these crossing points around schools. I'm assuming that number is significantly lower due to pandemic and to the closures of schools, which would make absolute sense. And I know you sent me an email, and I haven't had an opportunity to read it yet. Did you? I asked about the numbers. Where were the 4 incidents that happened in that time frame, and I was wondering if you'd be able to enlighten me to where those incidents happened, or what timeline.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Courser. So one accident was at Mapleview Drive East and Country Lane. One was right at 18 Dunnett Drive. One was at Coulter Street and Bayfield Street. And the other one was Edge Hill Drive and Ann Street North.
Thank
Those were
you
the
very
intersections.
much. And I know that you supplied that information, I just didn't get to it. Thank you. And I did ask, and there was another question I wanted to ask. So yes, with relation to, would this program going forward, as the city being funding this, would this be portionally funded through the automated speed camera revenues, or would that be a decision that would go across council at that time?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Courser. So the staff recommendation is to receive the information, and if council wished to move forward, there would need to be a funding source identified at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions from members of council? Yes, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Through you to staff, now I understand the rationale as to how the 9 locations were obtained, but this is where sometimes I know one thing might look great on a spreadsheet, but then in real life, it doesn't necessarily equate to what I'm seeing and hearing from residents. So the location at Coghlan and Ems, which is just behind the Food Basics Plaza, just around the corner from actually the Peggy Hill Community Center. In 6 years, I haven't had one complaint about that location. So I'm just kind of curious how that location made the list, but then drawing a blank on the name of the school that backs onto Veterans Drive by Mapleton, and they have their own separate signalized crosswalk that goes across Veterans. However, I fairly regularly get emails, calls from parents where people are disobeying the red and going right through, along with the intersections at Harvey Road and Veterans, and also ESSA and Veterans, because some of the kids going to that school live on the other side of ESSA Road. And most of the issues at those 2 intersections are typically people making right and left-hand turns. So I'm just kind of curious, how does a quiet little intersection that's right in the middle of a subdivision that's only 1 lane each direction end up making the list, but then these other ones that are on 4 and 5 lane roads where we have had a lot of complaints didn't make the list?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Harvey. Staff did an extensive studies at most schools. I think we did 112 locations. We studied several different locations, and the way the exposure index works, which is what we use to determine the warrants, it looks at the pedestrians crossing in mixture of vehicles turning, conflicting turning movements, and we have a different exposure index for an always stop versus a traffic signal versus a ped signal. So in the instance of the first one, Coghlan, we had close to 50 pedestrians with, I don't have the data right in front, I can't see it, but we did have, it made the exposure index for an always stop. So we had the amount of pedestrians crossing combined with the conflicting turning movements.
And just a follow-up to that, are you able to tell me whether or not the other locations that I mentioned on Veterans, were they part of the 112 that were studied? We can take it offline.
Yeah, we'll take it offline, yeah.
It kind of looks like he's got a big wad of papers he's trying to go through, so yeah, we can take that piece offline. Just a couple other follow-ups, and I'm just kind of wondering about the funding piece of this, and where I'm comparing it to is more recently there's been some articles in the news in regards to New Tecumseh actually considering taking away their crossing guard program, which I'm not so sure is necessarily the right direction, but that's, because I get the need for them at certain areas. But when it comes to the funding, the cost that's being proposed here is significantly different than the cost that New Tecumseh currently has, and you're only proposing 2 additional crossing guards. So for their 7 crossing guards and 4 alternates, their 2024 budget is $85,000 to pay the guards and an administrative budget of $27,000. But what's being proposed is only 2 more guards that are going to be between $140,000 and $190,000, along with a supervisor that's going to be up to $114,000, and then a vehicle that's going to be $40,000, well, $35,000 and then $5,000 a year. So I'm just trying to grasp why we need to have something so different than what another community already has that seems to be operational and has been for several years.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Harvey. Certainly on bullet 14 of the staff report outlines, as I said, and first off, sorry, we can't comment on New Tecumseh. I'm not sure how they do their math. Potentially they have different staff levels already that they didn't need to hire extra people. As I said, I haven't looked at their program specifically. But ultimately, you know, staff, we laid this out, I think, pretty clearly in terms of what the going rate is for salaries, understanding that we don't have any of these pieces of infrastructure in place. This would be an absolutely brand new project, no existing staff, no existing resources available to do any of it, quite frankly. And that's why, as I said, the numbers are the way the numbers are presented. And really, that's really all I think I can offer in that respect.
Great, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton, floor is yours.
Thank you, and through you. Thank you for the report. I appreciate it. I think this is a long time coming, and I know there'll be many residents that are pleased that we're actually taking a serious look at this. I do have some questions and some concerns. One, I think, and I appreciate the due diligence that was done in identifying the 9 locations. I'm not going to challenge the data or the approach in identifying that, but from my perspective, how many elementary schools are there in the city? Is there 50?
I believe there's somewhere around 50.
Somewhere around 50. So we've identified 9 of 50 schools. And for me, I mean, I think, you know, the crossing guard program, and there's none in Ward 10, unfortunately. How do I tell parents, well, you know, your school or your kid didn't make the cut or make the list? So for me, just identifying the 9 and already hearing from Councillor Harvey, the one that was identified for him is the one that doesn't get any complaints. I get a ton of complaints in a couple of my schools and it's not listed here. So I feel like that's problematic. I would have liked to have seen a more sort of equitable solution across the city. 2, the costs associated with it. So if we break it down, if it's $400,000 in 9 schools, that's $45,000 a school to hire, you know, a crossing guard and run the program. And I think that's exorbitant for those, just again, limiting it to the 9 specific schools. The effectiveness of crossing guards, again, you know, I have slight concerns, and I've done my research and I've looked at sort of, you know, there's limited data on actually measuring it. And I think it's more, you know, the parents' perception or the community's perception of a crossing guard program actually enhancing safety. But when you look at the data, that's not always the case. It doesn't actually show it impacts, you know, drivers' habits or accidents. So I also question $45,000 at a school, and really is it going to have an impact? So if we do proceed with this or not, I definitely want to make sure data collection is a part of it so we can compare it to other measures, whether it be, you know, the cameras that we're using or changes to curb or raised intersections, just so that we can actually look at the effectiveness of this. And my 4th concern is really having the city take complete accountability for the program. I would have loved to have seen a more collaborative approach with the school boards and the schools. So when I've thought about this, I've, you know, and talked to a couple of you, and, you know, how do we proceed with this, but maybe in a much more realistic way, in a more equitable way, in a more comprehensive and collaborative fashion. So I do have an amendment, but I would like to actually hear some dialogue, but I'm happy to put it on the table too. But it's really looking at allowing all schools to participate in this program, so opting in, and contributing a portion of the funding to support it. So schools could decide, the parent councils could decide whether or not, their specific school needs this, whether, say, safety concerns there. They would say, yes, we want to be part of it, we want to buy in, we would fund part of it, and maybe I'll read the amendment. Maybe that's probably easier. Put it on the table and we can have dialogue. So I will do that if that's okay. I'm just going to pull it up. So amendment to a DEV 02124 Adult School Crossing Guard Program to delete paragraph 1 and replace it with the following. That annual funding of $150,000 be allotted to fund school traffic patrolling programs funded from the Automated Speed Enforcement Program commencing the fall 2024, subject to the following. Schools must submit an application to be considered by the Community Safety Committee. Funding is capped at $3,000 a year per school. And C, to have data collected in order to compare the effectiveness of this program against any other traffic calming safety measures, including automated speed enforcement in raised intersections. And if I could, Mayor Nuttall, just elaborate a little bit on some of the math there and the allocations that I've identified. That's okay. So again, looking at the first case scenario, we've got 9 schools and it's roughly $45,000 a school because we have, we have to hire a manager and we need a car. I think if we do it this way, it's much more cost effective. And if you actually look at each school who wants to buy into this, hiring a crossing guard at $15 an hour, 3 hours a day, as staff said, so 15 hours a week, and there's 194 days in a school year. The cost would be about $9,000 for the school to run it. So if we provided a third of that funding, it would then put the onus on the school and the parents and the community to say, yes, we want to opt in, the city's in, they're going to contribute a third. We could put pressure on the board to contribute. Schools could look at ways to fundraise as well to participate. And it's more of a joint effort. I think a much more equitable approach, and it really does allow us within our wards to work with our schools and work with our communities to really look at how we can take advantage of city funds to roll out this type of program and also make sure that we've got the data in place to really look at the effectiveness of the dollars that we're spending on it.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Kungle, then I have Councillor Corser.
Thank you. And thank you for trying to put forward an amendment to kind of explore this, Councillor Hamilton. In thinking about it, for me, it would be looking at probably I'm not opposed to that, but probably the timing of it. So if I'm thinking about Ward 3 and I've got 2 schools in this report, that's really just for information, but I would say the biggest piece for me is, wanting to see how we use some of the funding through the revenue of the cameras around speed cushions. And I recognize that there's an aspect in the report that talks a little bit about pros and cons to this, but the context of it being a city program or a non-city program. I think I would promote that it's a non-city program, and I'm not sure where that fits in the amendment, if I caught all of the context of that, or where there's options. So where we do consider maybe part of the revenue budget to put aside and say, this might support up to a couple of number of schools to say, if you can incentivize your school to opt in, then here's access to funding. For others, maybe use them for speed cushions. Because I would say, like on my schools in particular, there's not enough speed cushions to go around 8 for my ward. And I think I'm hearing that would be a priority area where I know in my last, 6 years, there are roads I can't get to. Or I'm splitting up speed cushions to try and do something, but I know they're more effective if you can put 2 together. So for now, I would say I'm not opposed to there being kind of a how do we incentivize schools to come to this and put something on the table to help them be a partner, but that it's not our liability, responsibility, or staffing, that's a school program. I think we still committed in the budget $20,000 to $40,000 at some point in time that supported the training. I believe that's still something we do. We don't do it, but I believe that's through Barrie Police Services, if I'm correct, and that's for them to use it to then bring in a trainer, do some school engagement, but that's really within the school to use. I'm not sure if it's actually been used over the past year or two, but maybe we can revisit that when we look at what are we investing and if that's still in the budget, if that's something that we've been doing around safe crossings. So at this point in time, I'm not opposed to it, but I'm wondering if that's more of a, can we have broader conversations about how we use the funding and what's eligible for revenue out of the ESA cameras? And then whether or not we'd put money aside for schools to opt in into an intake form for the next budget.
Okay. Thank you.
I just was questioning something that was said, but I can wait.
So can you wait until I go to Councillor Corser, then I'll come back to Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Corser.
Our quick conversation before we cracked open this can of worms, it just kind of dawned on me that this is a really good idea. I like to see the onus being on the school board to chip in. My challenge with this is it will not be equitable with different schools in different areas of our city. And I'll tell you why. Because I know the school my son goes to, they have to fundraise for tissues. Like, we've got parent councils that are fundraising for, rolls of like paper towels for the classrooms and supplies. So there are neighborhoods in our city that are more financially stable than others. So my concern is if we're tying the ability to opt into this program to these schools, pressuring the parents and to pressure the schools or to get buy-in from the schools, there are certain schools that just don't have the money. And they can't raise the money for their own in-school things, crayons, just different things. I remember, Play-Doh. I made buckets of it when I was at home. Trust me, any parent out there, just buy it. It's just not worth making it. It's too much of a pain in the butt. But anyway, if you can. But these are the kind of things that they're struggling to pay for within the schools. And I don't know if it would be equitable to ask schools, parent councils in certain schools that are of a lower income area or lower income student base they get left out of this program because they can't raise the money to opt into it. And that would be a very serious concern of mine. But as far as pressuring the school board to chip into this, I think that we should absolutely be knocking on their door to buy in for this. But these specific schools is disconcerting to me.
Thank you, Councillor Corser. Councillor Hamilton, then Councillor Morales.
Thank you, and through you, and just to respond to Councillor Cursor, I guess that's the two options that we have, right? There's an equity in only identifying 9 schools, and then there's an equity in offering it to everybody, but having some schools in a better position to be able to fundraise versus others. So that's sort of the two options we have to weigh out, right? And so valid points that you raised. Just for Councillor Kungl, are you proposing that we would still move ahead with the staff report and the line locations, but in addition to that, we would look at, I just wasn't sure what you're saying, in addition to that, we would look at setting aside funds for other safe measures, or were you thinking the amendment, yes, but that $3,000 that we are contributing to schools that they would opt in, it doesn't necessarily have to go to a crossing guard program, it could go to other safety measures that they would want within their school?
Yeah, so for me, I'm supportive of just receiving the report right now for information, but if there's something in, maybe it's a broader conversation around considering this, and maybe that's Mayor's task force or coming back to what are the elements of the revenue of the camera generated funding after we know what's left from other investments we made around staffing, to say if we care about safety measures, what's a safety measure? And could this be something where there's a bit of money that says, okay, do we or don't we care about having schools maybe opt in for those that are interested, or potentially something's better than nothing. So those that can, does it support safety, and do they care about it enough to kind of be able to tie in if they've got the funding? If not, we know it's a gap overall citywide, and so how do we move the cameras, and or how are we supporting certain wards who want more speed cushions? But basically, how are we using that revenue, not just for more cameras and the support, which has its own merits as a program component, but now what's the other additional infrastructure we can explore? And I would maybe say that that's where I would see some funding set aside to see if we pilot that and see if any schools come forward.
Thank you, Councillor Kungl. Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. I like the amendment from Councillor Hamilton. The one thing I guess I would pivot on the amendment is I want to reconcile, I guess, the 9 locations that were objectively chosen by staff and the spirit of the pilot program. I know we haven't stamped that, so I'll say the spirit of the pilot program of those 9 locations, and then also find a way to integrate moving forward after we produce a deliverable, after we have a proof of concept, both to the parent councils, to the principals, vice principals, community, parent councils, and school board, and go, look, we've run this pilot for 12 months. It's worked at these locations that were, and I repeat, objectively chosen by staff. And then after that point, we move forward with a funding model that has the accountability KPIs and opt-in from the parent councils. Why? There was a lot of emphasis, and I recall, I don't have the transcript in front of me, but if I recall, there was a lot of emphasis on saying, let's be careful about this moving forward, let's not give false promises. If we move forward, we'll probably do a pilot, and staff, you go out and pick the locations, because otherwise, you know, how do we say to somebody, like, this location didn't get chosen? So I think what we have in front of us, members of council, is the selection of the 9 locations. So if we leave that intact and go forward, we produce, again, a proof of concept that is objective, and then moving forward, I'm sure a lot of schools that didn't get chosen in this location are going to be giving calls to the parent councils, to the counselors, and to the principals specifically going, how has it been working? Is it worth it? Because if it's worth it, we're going to make this a priority at our parent council the next 6 months. And so schools that may take more time to fundraise could have a bigger runway in order to do that, and now you have a proof of concept. So I do like the wording of Councillor Hamilton's amendment of the KPIs, and I even like them submitting an application to the Community Safety Committee. The only thing is, the reason I want to reconcile that with these 9 locations is when the applications come into the Community Safety Committee, it's being decided by councillors, which is no issue, but there's now that human aspect that I know there was a lot of concern with when we were even asking the staff to do this, of like, you pick the objective locations and that's it. So I guess my comments, Mayor Nuttall, are I support the amendment if it was, I support the, sorry, I'm getting indications.
Just a point of clarity, this would allow anybody, there's no yes or no. If the school raises the 2/3, then, so just a point of clarity, like, we wouldn't be able to opt out.
Deputy, I'm going to let him finish and then make that comment, yeah.
Okay, so you know what, I'll take my time, Mayor Nuttall, and maybe pivot in the form of a question so it doesn't seem like I missed something. So, Councillor Hamilton, would this funding would this funding essentially replace the pilot project and essentially be, if you can fundraise the money, you will match you in subsidy? Is that essentially what your amendment is intending to do?
If I can, and through you, Mayor Nuttall, yes. So my amendment's actually replacing this program, because this program requires city to own it, right? So city's hiring a manager, city's getting a car, city has the liability, city's assuming the risk, is a completely city-run program. My amendment actually does away with what's being proposed and saying, let's take a more collaborative approach where the school actually hires and runs the program, and we contribute to it in a collaborative manner. So each school would have an option of whether or not they wanted to pursue this. They could hire a crossing guard. We would pitch in 1/3 of the cost. We could work with the school board and try to get them to pitch in, another 1/3 of the cost, and the school is left to fundraise based on their priorities, right? Some schools this will be a priorities based on parent pressure, and in some it might not be. So, but I think it does away with the whole city running this and taking complete accountability, liability, and risk with it, and it does lessen the overall costs, because you can see what we propose, $400,000, $45,000 a school, as opposed to a collaborative approach where the school actually runs it, and it's $9,000 a school.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for that, and I'll just quickly wrap up, Mayor Nuttall. Okay, so now I understand it. I like the idea of reallocating the responsibility maybe where this needs to be. So I like that approach of the amendment, Councillor Hamilton. I do have to agree with Councillor Councillor a lot. This just, and it's not on purpose, but this just creates the conditions where parent councils who have experience fundraising, experience organizing will rally. We all know schools, I'm not going to pick any specific schools that have the fancy sports team uniforms and the ones that don't. And then there's schools that they can barely get through disciplinary appeals and things of that nature. So, and the energy of parents doesn't reflect the severity of traffic reality. Sometimes they're one and the same, but sometimes they're not. So I'm not saying no, I'm just saying now I get what you were saying, and I'm somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to hand the floor back to you, Mayor Nuttall, because I think there could be some good discussion on this.
Deputy Mayor Thompson, then Councillor Reba.
So I will be supporting the amendment, and I do understand that some of the concerns. The one thing I would like to see is that we could actually increase the portion that we help with the grant if we could determine that we've actually increased the walkability of the school. So they measure about the drop-offs, because that would solve another problem with a lot of streets being, burdened by the drop-offs and pickup. So if we made a safer way optically for people to walk to school, that we would increase the funding by a little bit, so there would be an incentive to get people out of the cars and walking to school. But I understand the equity part of certain schools, but the way the staff report is to receive, this is, do you want a piece of the pie or none of the pie? This is a way that it'll give people the opportunity to do it, or the other is way cost inhibitive to the taxpayer. And I think, sometimes we've got to look, it's hard to subsidize everything for everybody. There's certain things that we're always going to have to subsidize. So I will support the amendment.
Councillor Reba.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think, this is a joint problem between ourselves and the school boards. And I think the amendment that we're looking at goes in the right direction, in that we're building a collaborative approach between ourselves and the school boards. I think that I'm prepared to support it, but I really would like to see the school board itself play a big role in this. Because I think that, as Deputy Mayor says, we have an opportunity here to change behavior in terms of walkability and improving safety at the same time. So I'm in support. I think there are a lot of wrinkles here to still be worked out, and I think that when staff contact the boards and say, hey, this is what we're thinking, I think there will be some discussion, and I think that's really important, because I think we really need to work together with our school boards to resolve this.
Thank you, Councillor Corser, and then Councillor Negussi.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Council, I can't vehemently disagree with the idea enough of having individual schools. Especially, there are maybe we can look at, there is a record of what schools are financially, the demographic of certain schools. There's a record being kept. There are certain schools in our city that there's a study been done, like they're ranked through the school board of which schools have lower demographic for finances than others. So I'm hoping that we could maybe bake that in somehow into a motion like this, because again, I do believe that some of the schools that are in lower income areas, parents are working multiple jobs. There's a lot of single parents trying to make ends meet. Times are tough as it is, and they don't have the bandwidth or time to volunteer, let alone the money to contribute a lot of the time. And I'm afraid that it's going to be messaging that, only kids from middle-class families deserve safe neighborhoods. And I don't want to see that kind of messaging be misconstrued from what comes from our City Hall. And I really do not like the idea of having, depending on schools with lower demographic for finances, being left out of the equation if they cannot organize and fundraise to have this kind of a program. I am supportive of the program, absolutely, and I'm supportive of bringing this to the school board, to get the school board involved to kick in some money, because I do believe it's some of their responsibility for sure. Absolutely. But I don't think it should be, the onus should not be on individual schools to do so. Thank you.
Councillor Negussi.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. I just have a clarity question to Councillor Hamilton. In the my email, it says 100,000 and funding is acceptable at 2,000. So I see some change on that. So I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Yeah, happy to answer that. Sorry, I was doing math, and in my original math, I didn't think it was sufficient enough to cover what the school's needs would be to do the program. So yes, we changed it to $150 and $3,000 for each school. That being said, I'm listening as Councillor Courser is talking right now, and she's really hitting home with this, because I absolutely do not want to be sending a message that only schools that can afford it and only communities that can afford it. And so I'm looking at, we've got two options here. We're spending $350,000, $400,000 on 9 schools, or do we up our contribution and still spend that money, but have the schools run the program, right? You can opt in and the city will reimburse you. Maybe it's $4,000, maybe it's $5,000, I'm not really sure. So anyway, answer your question, but I think maybe we can have some more conversation on what that price tag is.
So maybe I may ask to staff. Mayor Nuttall, I don't think the city will solve this issue, with a single hand. Somehow the school board should be part of this program. I know they said no, but is there any way we can refer to staff or ask staff to reach out to school board again, at least to come up with some kind of, it's not only money actually. I know some parents are willing to involve in volunteerism.
So yes, we can always refer to staff. I think that they've done their work on this, Councillor. I think that we've had the answer from the school board. They were sitting right there during community safety. I think the only way that they get involved is by us approving something and essentially public shaming them into being involved. And I'm not sure that works in the end, to be honest with you. So you can refer to staff, and there can be a motion to refer to staff, but I'm not sure what they're going to do other than make a phone call and get told the same thing we were told 6 months ago when they were here. And I think it just wastes more time and punts it down the road.
Okay. Community safety is one of the biggest issues in our city. I've been involving in at least 6 town hall meetings, and what I learned as a new council is different ward has different issues. But one of the most common problem is community safety, traffic, speeding. So I really like the staff report, but I'm inclined to the amendment because I think it's going to help the city. So thank you, Mayor.
Okay, before we keep going, I have Councillor Harvey, I've got Councillor Kungle, I think, as well. Councillor Reitman, did I end up going to you? You're good for now. I apologize. I'm going to just say a few things and try to cut through some of this stuff. So, super honest time, I'm not sure that a crossing guard is more effective than a planter tree, or more effective than a raised intersection or a speed bump, or an intersection pedestrian signal or a stoplight. And staff are not proposing that we go ahead with anything here, right? So it's not a choice between what Councillor Hamilton's put forth and 9 locations from the city. It's actually a choice between the 2 things that have been on the floor are 0 and a $3,000 subsidy per school-ish. So my belief is this, that we're going to go and do the work, and we're going to monitor what happens around speed bumps and raised intersections and stoplights and crossing guards, etc., and it's going to come back. And the lowest reduction in speed and increase in safety is going to end up being crossing guards. But I do not know that for sure. And that's why when we originally had this conversation at community, I think it was community safety, there was a presentation. I'd asked for a pilot project. I did not envision a 9 location pilot project. I know I'm an outlier, I'd be fine with one, but I think as the conversations have been had, it's, well, how do you choose the one? And, you know, you've got somebody who's been fighting in the community really, really, really hard for this to take place, which is why we're all talking about it. And in this current staff report, they're on the outside looking in, right? I am very, very, very familiar with inequity. Very familiar with inequity. You know, I grew up with very, very, very little. And in some cases, my school didn't get what the other schools did. St. Peter's didn't have a football team until, I think, about 8 years ago, because they couldn't afford the equipment to have a football team. Innisdale had one, right? There was a lot of difference in what's offered at different schools. Barrie Central had an incredible music program, not offered in Innisdale, right? There naturally is inequity around the city, and I wish we could stroke a pen and fix that. I don't think it's going to happen. I think as we're looking at offering something to the community to say, we're willing to be part of the solution, but we can't manage this, and if we do manage it, our costs are going to go from what should be a few $1,000 to $45,000 per door, per school. But we're willing to come to the table and be part of it. And schools, we want you to be innovative on how you provide it. Is it a volunteer program that we're putting $3,000 towards? Is it a paid person? Is it, you know, there's many different variations of what could result out of it, and somebody come up with a way better model than the 11 of us are going to think about around this table. But to say that we're going to provide zero because some schools are going to be, it's going to be easier to raise money than others, I think is a very difficult position to take. We as a council don't look at when we're putting out these initiatives, we don't consider, is this a low-income neighborhood or is this not a low-income neighborhood if we're putting out an IPS, an intersection pedestrian signal, or a speed bump. I think we say, where's the traffic issue and how do we help? But that's when we're in control. And what's being proposed here is that we are not in control, but that we will try to be a financial help at the table. I do lots of fundraising in the community. I know many of you do lots of fundraising in the community. If there's a school, and I can think of a couple, and I'm not going to say them because it's not where, like, I don't want to embarrass anything or anyone, that needs a little bit of help, then, you know, my door is always open. I know Councillor Coursor, your door is always open, and so is everyone else. So I don't think these are things that we can't manage, but I can tell you that we're not going to manage anything if we don't do anything. And I also think at the end of this, Councillor Kungle, you're mentioning the amount of money that's going to be available. We don't know. Hard infrastructure, right? And I honestly believe today the hard infrastructure will end up with a safer environment than crossing guards. But I would like the information to back that up. I really, really would. So that's where I'm at on after, I think this is our 5th meeting going through this subject. That's where I'm at on it. We're not going to do anything perfect. If we pick 9 schools, there's 41 of them that are going to be upset. And if we pick no schools, there's 50 of them upset. And if we offer $3,000 per, maybe still 50 are upset. I don't know. So I have Councillor Harvey, and then I had Councillor Kungle, and then Councillor Coursor. No, we're still speaking to the amendment. Yeah. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall, and I appreciate your comments and stuff, and I know this has been a live conversation that would date back prior to even the previous council, when Councillor Morales was on council for his first term. I remember watching it, and the only reason it never went anywhere was the exorbitant cost in regards to it. I do like the amendment that's on the table, and actually it would be a bit of a trailblazing amendment, to be quite honest with you, because I don't know of any other places in the province where the school boards have been a partner and actually manage this. But it's definitely far easier to manage, because especially if you were to, again, this would be up to the school board to decide, but if it was up to someone at each individual school to monitor their 1 or 2 crossing guards wherever they decide, it's a heck of a lot easier to manage at that small local level at each school than it is to try and have one supervisor trying to manage. With the size of our city, I wouldn't even want to potentially guess how many crossing guard locations we could end up if this moves forward. So I really do like the amendment, and the only thing is I don't think there's enough money on the table to really get them to bite. I'd actually even be in support of even doubling the amounts, because realistically, I don't think 3,000 a school is going to do it. Whereas if we were to double it to 300K and 6 per school, I think then they've got something to work with, and it has a heck of a lot better chance of getting off the ground at the school level than it does with what's being proposed. And I did have a little quick sidebar with Councillor Hamilton about this before I brought this forward, so I will just kind of leave that as a friendly and let her to decide, because it is her amendment.
Councillor, there's a request for a friendly. Is it a friendly or an unfriendly?
I think it's friendly. I think we're along the same lines. Again, we want to incentivize schools to participate, right? Not create additional barriers or not throw, small amounts of money that really aren't going to be effective or impactful. So for me, trying to figure out what that magic number is, I don't know, but I am absolutely open to taking the friendly and increasing it from 3,000 to I'm hearing 6. Anybody got a 6,000? I'll take 6,000. I think, that does help address Councillor Cursor's comments too in creating, at least a more equitable approach across schools that do have a hard time fundraising, and really giving them a substantial amount of money to say, if you want to opt in, this is covering more than half, right? This is covering 2/3 now of it. I think that's a lot more appetizing for most schools. And again, it'd be up to them to sort of prioritize. Like you said, there's always going to be inequities, but I think we're at least minimizing that gap across the city. So happy to take the friendly.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kungl and then Councillor Courser.
So I still have reservations, not in providing money on the table for schools to kind of opt in, but around the scope of this. And so I feel like I need a little bit more in front of me, because without kind of seeing it, my question is timing. So when is the money on the table, and how are we communicating this? Like, I would almost like a first step to be, there's an intention by council to seriously put money on the table here. Who's in? Because I'm making assumptions thinking staff have brought forward a presentation saying just to do citywide, it's $350,000 to $400,000. I'm then assuming 1 or 2 schools on different school boards aren't going to opt in and try and run a program with all of that administrative oversight. So like the structure of the program that we're saying needs to happen to operate at citywide, how does that relate to 1 or 2 schools as a one-off with a school board? We almost need a school board to opt in, is my assumption. And so I think it's around like who needs to be part of the conversations from an engagement to say, can you do it, and how do we help you get there? And then to say who really wants to do this but just financially can't. Like, where do we see interest that may start a different conversation around, if the school board says, yeah, we'll cover this much, we'll own the program, but schools are responsible for so much money on their own, then how do we help some of those that may have stronger limitations to get there, and how do we prioritize that? So I get into the nitty gritty, but for me it's around when we say we'll help them fund the program, what's the threshold, and for how long are we committed to? Are we trying to start something and then just say, at some point in time, we want you to own this, we're going to help you get there? Is this seed funding, or is this a long-term forever commitment? And so I think for me it's looking at a bit more scope about what's the string attached to the money. And so I think for me, I'm comfortable saying, we'll put money on the table, but I'd like to know more before it's just here's your access to it, about how they're actually going to make it a successful program, and they appreciate the dynamics of how it's operating. So
Councillor, I hear you. I think maybe, first of all, I thought this was 2025, September.
So
That
we
would be
actually,
considered?
the original proposal or originally staff report, that would probably be fall of 2025, just because it was such a comprehensive program. If we're doing it this way, there's really less startup or lead-up time that city would need, so we could actually commence this fall of 2024. Again, there'd be works involved in terms of meeting with the school board and understanding the city, but the funding itself could be available for 2024, fall 2024.
Yeah, and I guess if I still have the floor, for me, it's around, we're coming into school season, so let's help them kind of set up for success, and how soon can we make that money available? So for me, I want to continue this conversation. I just don't think I'm able to support it with the current context of the conversation, but I like it to continue. So I'm not sure if we want to defer this to like a mayor's task force to flesh it out a bit more, or?
So I think probably referring it to community services, not community services, community safety committee would be the best route, because we're having a political conversation. We're not having a staff conversation at this point. And then also maybe sending an invite out to the elementary school parent councils to come and participate. I do not want to set an expectation that this fall, I feel like rushed with this fall, and when you're rushing with kids' safety, it's not a great move. So I'm more of the position that if we want to take more time as a council, and that's up to or committee, sorry, it's up to committee to decide. Yes, and let's get them involved, because they may come back and say, the parent councils may come back and say just like no, or the school board may intercede and say yes, or they may intercede and say no. And I think we have a bunch of grant programs right now that we run. We know how to run a grant program. What we're struggling with is there's another organization that's running events every single day that have trouble with both traffic and pedestrian traffic, and we don't know how to make it a safer environment for it. So I'm good with the move, if everyone else is good with the move, over to community safety. Mr. Chair, I see you looking at me like, why would you send that to me?
May I? I see a certain level of value in putting an offer on the public table and moving the chess pieces. I say that as politely as I can. I see a level of value when somebody puts an offer in the public and the other great stakeholder, that is community, sees it and it's out there by the media. How do I phrase? It incentivizes their best response. If we send it to committee, if we do the phone thing again, we've done that. We've been doing that for years. So I don't know if I see value. It doesn't mean it would be bad. If it passes, it passes. That's great. We'll have it at community safety. But there is a certain value at moving your chess piece publicly. And when you have it funded, it moves the lever.
Mr. CAO.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall and members of committee. In an attempt to bring some clarity, I have to flag that I'm a little concerned because language has become mixed in council's debate. The amendment that was introduced referenced school traffic patrolling programs. Those are not adult crossing guards. And I know that was the word that was introduced. However, when it was repeated back, it was getting flipped. So I wanted to just provide some clarity. The staff report in paragraph 3 speaks to the Highway Traffic Act. School crossing guards can only be employed by the municipality or contracted by the municipality. So the school cannot hire school crossing guards. They can partner with us on funding, but at the end of the day, it would be something that we would have to either directly or indirectly control. And there was different language being used, so I just wanted to make sure that we, before we got too far down the road, clarified that. And the other piece I did want to call out, because there was discussion around money and revenues. I think staff have grave concerns over overcommitting revenues from the speed camera program. We expect the speed camera program to work, which means people will slow down and our revenues will diminish, not increase. So I would caution council about overcommitting. There is definitely some revenue that can be utilized. I would just encourage restraint around overcommitting those dollars, because you may find yourself in a deficit position on that program.
Thank you. Just to go back to the verbiage on the first piece of that, the safety patroller program versus a crossing guard program, which So the safety patroller program can be run by the school board?
Mayor Nuttall, that is my understanding. In fact, I think some of them currently have them, typically supported through Barrie Police, and we may or may not still have a small grant that we give Barrie Police for that.
Do we have any indication of what schools actually run it?
I think we'd have to get back to you on that, Mayor Nuttall.
Is there, see, that, to me, I think, maybe I missed it in the report, but that to me is new information as well, in the sense that I actually would like that to go to community safety, because I'd like them to come in and tell us how they run their program. Because I think we've agreed that we're not going to go and spend $2 million a year on a what was the verbiage, Mr. CEO? Adult crossing guard. I need one of those. An adult crossing guard program. But we would like to incentivize some safety around these school zones, like when I know some of us are older than others, but like when we were all kids, we had them, right? Like there was grade 7s or 8s in my elementary school that made sure I crossed at the right place and I crossed safely, and I didn't run out in the middle of the street when I was a kindergarten or grade 1 or 2 or 3. So, yeah, I think I hear you, Councillor Morales. I also think that I'd like to get that information before moving forward.
Do I still have the floor?
Pardon?
Wait, do I still have the floor? I know we merged, okay. So I think just in light of all that, for me, very happy to continue to have a conversation, but I won't support the amendment at this time. I'll look to receive the information, but do hope it finds its way to another committee for a broader conversation with, I think, what's happening with the money we've invested in some of the school programs through Barrie Police. What could this look like? But then also, once I think we know more about what money might be on the table, what does a bigger picture conversation about investment in safety, additional infrastructure look like? And programs to speed cushions, I think, should be part of the scope of that. My last comment is more of actually a question. When I'm looking at the areas of focus through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Ms. Banfield, to your staff, can you remind me, is there a relationship or not to the 9 that are identified in this, to where we identified the prioritization of where to start moving the cameras in school zones? I'm assuming it's separate and apart, but I didn't know if this information, if it didn't have a relationship to the order of where we're rotating those cameras, will it influence it?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Congo, there's no correlation.
Thank you, that's helpful. I know we've just been talking about these schools and the cameras and other pieces and how we're using current infrastructure. Just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Councillor Corser.
Well, I have issue, through you, Mayor Nuttall, I have issue with Mr. Prowse because he stole all my questions. You answered them all because I was like, yeah.
But you still had your hand up.
I know, but the other piece I had to that was I don't know where I should plop in the questions I want to ask because we are now currently on the motion, the amendment, the motion. So the amendment, so I wanted to, we're going to vote on that, and then I'd like to, or I can speak to the
I'm not sure we'll end up voting on that, and once there's a referral motion on the floor, you can't do anything.
Okay, I would like to ask staff, we have 9 locations in front of us here that, as Councillor Congo just alluded to, that are considered problematic or ripe for some sort of safety assistance. My question is as council, as community safety, as whatever, what are we going to do about it? Because obviously these have been flagged as needed, the suggested areas that we should have a crossing guard. So maybe it's a conversation, maybe an item for discussion I can put forward. But obviously these places have been highlighted and we need to readdress them. What we have in front of us.
So is that to councillor or to?
Yeah, I guess to staff. Has there been any discussion about, because these locations have been flagged, has there been any discussion within traffic or safety that would, has there been any discussion about actions being taken outside, like as an immediate remedy, if not just temporary but immediate remedy of how we can assist these locations within our city?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Coursor. So the identified locations really just show from a statistics perspective that they meet the warrants. It does not mean that the intersections are unsafe. It doesn't mean that the children crossing the streets to access these schools are unsafe. Staff, as you know, will look at school areas all the time and recommend improvements if there are cases. But, you know, I need to stress, these locations aren't unsafe. These are simply the locations that meet the technical criteria for a crossing guard.
Just wondering, because one of the locations which is on the list, I am very familiar with because I received emails and phone calls quite frequently about it. So I'm just wondering if the other locations that are on the list are issues, as Councillor Harvey said, not so in his location. So another offline, maybe an item for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coursor. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, and through you, I just have a question for Mr. Proust, and thank you for clarifying the language, because I'm not sure if I caught that or understood that initially. But my question is, in the report it says that the adult crossing guards could be employed by a corporation under contract with a municipality. So it doesn't mean they have to be directly employed by the municipality, but I'm assuming if we had contracts in place with a school, would that not suffice in having an adult crossing guard program? Like, again, if a school bought in, I imagine there would be some sort of contract or relationship with them. Would that not meet the criteria?
Through Mayor Nuttall to Councillor Hamilton. I think Councillor Hamilton, we'd have to take that back and take a look at it. I think the intent here is clear that the municipality owns the responsibility for crossing guards. I know, for example, Newmarket has a hybrid program where they have their own crossing guards, but they have also contracted out a company to provide that service. But at the end of the day, the municipality is responsible for that service. So while there could be, I believe, collaboration and potentially partnership, I think based on my initial reading of this, at the end of the day, the organization responsible for that program would be the City of Barrie. It doesn't matter who funds it or participates in it.
Okay. Then I think I'm going to withdraw my amendment, I think, this time, because I think there's more information. Like, I would like to explore that, because the way I interpret or read it, I do think there's some room for some unique approaches here. And, you know, it might be a Barrie approach, but I think we really have to look at what is within our limitations and what could be done in a collaborative fashion. I definitely like the idea of the adult crossing program, and I think that was sort of what we've heard from the community, as opposed to kids leading kids, which I know we grew up with and it worked well, but it doesn't seem to be, you know, the desire out in the community anymore. So I'm going to remove it. I think, similar to what Councillor Kungol has said, I think we require some more information, but I don't want it to be left. I want to make sure we still have this conversation at Community Safety Committee, and that we can take some offline conversations before that. So I don't know how to do that. Refer it.
So you can withdraw, and then before I take your referral motion that you just put on the floor, I just want to ask one question of clarity. We have events happen all the time, and traffic management is something that happens all the time. And the city is not the one who contracts those pieces of traffic management. We oversee a traffic management report and we sign off on it, but we don't contract those services. So why would it be different with the school board in these scenarios?
Mayor Nuttall, I'm assuming that question is to me. I'm not a lawyer, although I play one on TV, as you well know. I think staff can give you some feedback on that. You are correct. You know, traffic control is part of, you know, ROA permits and special events, et cetera. I'm simply articulating what the Highway Traffic Act indicates and defines. Are there options? As I had indicated to Councillor Hamilton, there may be. We haven't been asked to explore them, and we can certainly do that. And if there's a referral to a committee, we can certainly have that discussion and get you some additional information around what that could look like.
That makes sense. Okay. So I'll now accept your referral motion, Councillor Hamilton. All those in favor of referring the adult school crossing guard program to the Community Safety Committee? It carries.
That was the update from City Hall. Thank you for watching.